Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be doing something a little bit new, something I haven't done on the channel yet. I've seen a lot of other Call of Duty YouTubers do it, and that is going to be ranking every single weapon within Warzone. Every single gun we're going to go through and give it a rank. Some are going to be top tier weapons, some are going to be complete garbage, and everything in between. And with this, you'll kind of get a pretty good idea of which weapons you should be using. And of course, for some of them, I'm going to give a little bit of an explanation why I rank them the way that I do. Now, this is going to be a long video because there's a lot of weapons to go through. So before we dive in, let's hear from today's video sponsor. So today's video is once again sponsored by Z-League, the world's first skill-based platform for Warzone tournaments where you can compete in free and paid for tournaments to win some cool prizes. Z-League believes that whether you're a god at the game or just getting into it and can't even get a win, you should be able to feel what it feels like to compete within Warzone. So whether you have a 0.5 or 5 KD, it'll be a complete fair bracket and you will still have a chance to win the tournament. And the cool thing is these tournaments work in a very similar way to the other tournaments that you may have watched, where you get points based off of the amount of kills you get, and on top of that, your final placement in the game. And on top of that, it doesn't matter if you're a PC or console player, Z-League works for everyone. So whether you play for free and just try to win some credits, or you put in some cash and actually go to win some cash prizes, there's tournaments every single day for solos, duos, trios, and quads. So whatever you play, there is a mode for you. And like I said, it doesn't matter how good at the game you are, because you'll always have that chance to win. So if you want to feel what it feels like to play at that next level, click the link down in the description, check out Z-League, and hop into some tournaments right now. And thank you, Z-League, for sponsoring the video. So this is the tier list here. We've got a ton of different weapons, as you can see. A lot to go through. It's still missing a couple from the more recent seasons, which I'll kind of pepper in there as we go, probably closer towards the end. As you can see, I've already kind of thrown a bunch of weapons into the niche category. Almost all of the pistols here, you don't really use them except for one. The one that I like to use, if I am going to use it, is the Diamante. It's just the one that I prefer. If I see it on the ground, I feel pretty comfortable picking it up. So I'll put that at viable, even though compared to any of the primary weapons that we're going to talk about, it's still not quite as good. I just prefer it as my go-to weapon. I like the burst. It has good movement. Just my opinion on it. Now, moving into the next thing that we have here, sniper rifles. There was a point where I'd actually put the Tundra in the competitive section, but they nerfed the bullet velocity on it to a point where I just don't really like it. So most of the sniper rifles that we're going to see here, we're just going to throw in below average. Pellington, definitely below average. I know some people like to use the M82. I just don't like a lot of the handling properties. One that you can actually use is probably the HDR. The reason why the HDR is actually decent is because it has high bullet velocity, and if you're not as good of a sniper, this might be a sniper that you consider using, essentially for the fact that it's easier to hit your shots, but the handling abilities aren't as good. So like one that I would recommend using is the Kar 98. I do think that's a top meta weapon. Personally, my favorite sniper rifle in the game, that or the Swiss. The Swiss I don't see on this list, but the Swiss has very similar properties now to the Kar 98, so you can replace that with the Swiss as well. The X50 kind of falls in the same slot here. I don't like it as much as the HDR, so I guess I'll put it in viable. But yeah, Dragunov, I'm just going to put the Dragunov as in garbage. Rytech, if you have the right attachments, it might be okay, but still. And yeah, just most of the sniper rifles below average. Crossbow, definitely a niche weapon. You're not going to really use that to be competitive with. The MK2 I think is garbage, and then the EBR, it had its moment in the spotlight where people were using it, but I still think it's definitely below average. The SKS, same kind of thing. Now this is where we get interesting, because this is where we get into the assault rifles, the tactical rifles, the LMGs, that kind of thing. So the AUG was a top meta weapon. They nerfed it. I don't even think it's viable anymore, to be completely honest with you. It just has too much recoil and the burst delay is too slow. The M16, on the other hand, I do think is viable, but I don't think it's a competitive weapon anymore. The DMR, same kind of thing, was the best weapon in the game. Now it's just below average. Same with the Type 63. Now, LMGs are an interesting spot for me because I'm not big on LMGs for the main reason I don't like their handling properties. To me, they move very, very slowly, and I just don't like using them in game. There are some decent ones. I think the M91 is viable. The Bruin I still think is viable. It's nowhere near what it was, but I do think it's viable. Everything else, I'm probably... Actually, no, the Stoner 63 is definitely viable as well. The rest of them, they're just move too slow. Not my cup of tea. Yes, some of them can be good. Even the PKM, I would consider throwing up there. But just for the ease of simplicity, I'm just going to throw most of these into the below average category. Some of them can be decent, but when you compare it to the other assault rifles and things like that, I think most of these just kind of come in as below average. Even though, yeah, you can do some decent work with them. To me, they just come in as below average. Now, the one I wanted to talk about is the RPG, because I don't think the RPG is necessarily a niche weapon. I think it is viable, but a lot of people run EOD, and because of that, it doesn't make it as good. But if you're wanting to take out vehicles or things like that, if you want to launch into a room, shoot into some attics, things along those lines, it's definitely viable, and that's kind of why I throw it there. Definitely not a top tier weapon though. Now the shotguns, I'm just gonna put them all at below average. They've all been nerfed pretty hard. You're gonna see a lot of weapons that I put in below average. Up here are all weapons that I would consider putting on loadouts. The viable aren't nearly as good. Everything else is, you're gonna see a lot of SMGs. You're gonna see a lot of assault rifles in that area. The VLK, I'm just gonna put in garbage. I can't stand that weapon. That's a niche weapon. 725, I'm gonna put in garbage as well. You just don't have enough shots with it. The Origin, I guess I'll put in below average. Same with the R9O. Model 680, same thing. Jack, same thing. All right, here's where we get into the more interesting stuff. So, like I said, a lot of the top tier here is going to be SMGs and assault rifles. It's just the way the meta currently is. Of course, we have our Kar 98 up there. We have our HDR up there. But AK-74U, I don't think it's really viable compared to the other SMGs in the game. I'm going to put it at below average, but you can use it with the right class setup. It's just not as good. The Milano's a tough one, because I don't know whether you put it in top... I think you put it in top tier right now. Yeah, you definitely put it in top tier right now, because you can use it with your Kar 98. It's good at close range. It's good at mid range. And with the right class setup, it is very, very good. I definitely think that's a current meta weapon with the most recent update to it. LC10, I will put at competitive. Sorry, there's a lot of weapons on here. It's kind of hard to scroll through them all. But yeah, the LC10 is definitely a good weapon if you haven't given it a shot. KSP, definitely below average. The MAC-10 has been top tier for a very, very long time now. One of my favorite SMGs. The handling properties are amazing on it. It kills people up close really, really fast. It's just a really good weapon. If you're not using it, you probably haven't been playing the game for very long. Strela, that's just going to go straight into the niche weapons. The Cold War MP5. So I thought, actually, this is two of the weapons that I really thought about before we kind of went into this, and I didn't know whether I was going to put the MP5s on top or competitive. And the thing is up to 10 meters, the Cold War MP5 is top tier, 100% top tier. The problem is I don't like it as much as the MAC-10 personally, but I think just in general, if I'm putting some of my opinions aside, I think I put it in top tier. Bullfrog, definitely competitive. Fennec, below average. ISO, below average. MP7. So MP7 is actually one that I have not used in a long time, but it is still competitive. It's not as good as the MAC-10, and it's not as good as the MP5s, but I would kind of put it on the same level as the Bullfrog LC10. It's still a decent weapon, has very low recoil, easy to control, fast fire rate. It's a weapon that I probably won't be putting on any of my class setups just because it's not quite as good, but I still think it's a competitive weapon. The AUG, we're going to throw into below average. Striker, definitely below average. Uzi, the Uzi's not bad. If you have the higher damage rounds on it, it's not... Actually, you know what? Some of these I need to put in viable. No. I was thinking about putting the AUG into viable, but I don't think it is. P90, definitely below average. The MP5, so this is a Modern Warfare MP5. I think we have to throw it in top meta as well. It's somewhere between competitive and top meta, I think. But I like it on my classes, so just with my opinion, I'm going to throw it into top meta. Pila, definitely a niche weapon. The Bison is nowhere as good as the Bullfrog, so I guess we'll put that at below average. Now, we are now into the assault rifles, and a lot of these are going to be meta. So Krig, definitely top meta. If you haven't tried this weapon out, it is absolutely 100% top meta. I'm just going to switch sides over here so you're more easily able to see the weapons we're talking about. The Farah is still top meta. As of right now, it is going to get nerfed whenever that patch comes out. I still think it's going to be a top meta weapon. Maybe would drop down to competitive, but personally, I think it's just too good to not be. XM4, top meta again. You're going to see a lot of assault rifles up here. Basically, I've talked about this in a recent loadout video. The XM4 is essentially the best SMG right now. It's very confusing that it is, but if you put the right attachments on there, you set it up as an SMG, it'll outgun most of the SMGs in the game. It is definitely a top meta weapon. After this, the FFAR, I actually think this is still a competitive weapon. It's not as good as it once was. It has a little bit more recoil, but definitely, I would say, a top meta weapon. The QBZ, I think we put in below average. The Groza, I think, is viable. It's not the best weapon, but you can definitely use it, make it a close quarters weapon. The AK-47, I think I put in competitive. And the reason why I say that is because similar to the XM4, it is a close range assault rifle. It has a lot of recoil. You're not going to win a lot of long range gunfights with it just because it has a lot of recoil. The XM4, the reason why I put it above is because it has lower recoil. I find it easier to use, and I think it's even better up close. So both are good, but I think the XM4 is a little bit better, and they both kind of fill the same role. The SCAR, I put in below average for sure. The Ram 7, I think I put the Ram 7 in viable. It's a good weapon. It melts people up close. I just think it's a little bit too difficult to use. I think you can build a class setup with it, but I would prefer the XM4. I'd prefer the AK-47 and maybe even the Groza, but it's definitely still a viable weapon. The Joker, we're going to put in top meta. No, we're not putting in top meta. It's just a niche weapon. Great for getting people off of roofs if you really want to. The M4A1. So this is getting back into the modern warfare weapons. It's a competitive weapon. It really still is. It's been a competitive weapon since day one of Warzone. It still is. If you have never used it or haven't used it in a long time, give it a shot. It's decent. It's really good. I wouldn't put it really on the same level as the Krieg or the Farah right now, just TTK wise, I believe. But yeah, it's definitely still a viable weapon. The FR556, I almost want to put it in the garbage, but we'll put it in below average. The Odin is actually a viable weapon. This is one I don't see a lot of people use. It has a really slow fire rate, but it does melt people if you hit your shots. It's just kind of one of those weapons, kind of like the C58. Actually, let's talk about those two new weapons. We have the new LMG. The new LMG I put in viable. It's not good at long range anymore. And the C58 is getting nerfed, but as of right now, it's actually a really good weapon. And I think it'll still be a decent weapon once the nerf comes in. So right now, I'd throw the C58 in competitive, maybe even going towards top meta. And then after the nerf, I'd probably put it in viable, but it's not on this list. So as I was recording this, the one weapon I forgot to mention is the nail gun. It did get nerfed today, but what I will say is it's still probably a top meta weapon. It absolutely shreds up close, but has a small magazine. So if you're in duos or solos, probably the best short range weapon, but in quads, you really got to be careful what gunfights you get into. After this, we have the M13 and the Kilo. Both of these are just viable. I don't think they're competitive. Both of them have really low recoil, really easy to use, but the TTK just isn't there. So for that, it kind of goes in the viable section. The Grau, I put in competitive. It's not as good as the Krieg. It's not as good as the Farah, but it is easy to control with the right class setup, that Archangel barrel. It's very, very good. I just don't think it's quite in that top meta section. Looking at this right now, all of these top meta weapons are ones that I've had on my last loadout video, and even some of these are ones that I'd consider making class setups out of, and then these are just kind of my for fun weapons, the viable ones. So it's kind of lining up properly. So after this, we have the other AK-47. I already put one into the competitive. We're just going to assume that this is the Modern Warfare version, and I'm just going to put that in below average. They didn't delineate between the two, but AN94 below average. The AMAX. Now, this is an interesting one. I still think it's competitive. I really do. They nerfed the hell out of it. It's nowhere near what it once was, but I really do still think it is a competitive weapon. It's good. It's, in my opinion, easy to pick people off with. Some people don't like the recoil on it, but yeah, I definitely still think it's viable. The FAL, below average. The RPG, we already have one up in viable, so we'll just throw this here for now. The AS Val, actually a decent weapon, definitely a viable weapon. I think it has a little bit too small of a magazine to throw it in competitive, but it melts people. If you haven't given it a shot, it's definitely a decent weapon. The 1911, we'll just put that in niche as well. And then the ZRG, I think I guess we'll throw it into below average for now. But yeah, that's pretty much that. So having a look at this list, it actually makes a lot of sense. If I look at all of the top meta weapons that I have here, all of these are ones that I threw in my season 4 loadout video. And it makes a lot of sense because these are the current weapons that I'd want to use in my loadout if I'm going for a high kill game, playing in a competitive game, something along those lines. Everything that I have in competitive are all weapons that I consider throwing on if maybe I'm sick of using these top competitive weapons. The competitive section here are all ones that I would consider using if I'm bored of using the top meta weapons, but still want to do well. The AMAX, the Grau are things that I would replace the Krig and the Faro with. The AK-47 is something I'd replace the XM4 with, the HDR, the CAR, and you can kind of see where this is going. They're good weapons, they're just not as good as those top meta weapons. All of these I think will be subject to nerfs in the next little while. I don't really see them nerfing the MP5s, but even the MAC-10 I don't think is safe. The viable weapons here are just decent. They have decent stats, you can use them, you can do well with them, but there is generally, if you look at all of these weapons in the viable area, there is one thing that makes them worse. So for example, it may have more recoil, like the Ram, or even like the Groza. It might have a slower fire rate, like the Odin. It might have slower handling properties like the LMGs. By the way, all of these LMGs I do think you can use. They're just not as good as using an assault rifle because of the movement properties, because of the ADS properties. Everything below here are things that I wouldn't really consider using on my classes. I may be missing a couple of gems in here that I didn't think of, and you may think that I'm really picky with the amount of stuff I put in below average, but that's just kind of the way Warzone is, in my opinion. Most of the weapons are below average, and I wouldn't really consider using them. And then these ones are just ones that I don't like at all. And then the niche ones are niche ones. They're very specific situations, or if you want to fool around. So I think this is a pretty good list. But at this point, I want to hear what you think. Let me know what weapons I missed down in the comments. Maybe I need to give some weapons a new try. Let me know if you agree with a lot of the things that I said. Let me know if you think I was too picky. Down in the description, I will link this tier list if you guys want to do it yourself, and maybe you can tweet them at me. My Twitter is linked down in the description. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. So check all of that out down in the description. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button. If you want to stay up to date on my videos, make sure you hit the subscribe button. But thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace out.
We are reaching for the stars, but we're making it.